and welcome to lecture number 11 for the Limits to Growth course this semester. So we're gonna dive back into the actual topic in a second. First, I want to make another advertisement for the invited lecture that we have next week. So next week is going to be an online lecture. You don't have to come to Clausthal or anywhere else. You can enjoy the nice invited lecture from the peace and the comfort of your own apartment. We'll have Gabriel from a project called the Cat Farm, which is an alternative sustainable living project in the south of France that we're collaborating with. And he will give you an idea of what it's like to run such a project, what they do, how they do it, and what an alternative, more sustainable lifestyle could look like. They are prototyping and testing a lot of things there. They're also looking into alternative governance models. So how can you organize a group of people in a very efficient manner? How could maybe groups of groups collaborate very nicely together without having downsides of current democratic processes? So not like overthrowing the democratic system, but maybe finding ways to live like a more community-focused lifestyle and what they've learned so far. But I'm going to stop here now because Gabriel is probably going to be way better explaining what they are doing there than I am. So please join, invite people who might be interested. So this is not a course or not a lecture exclusive to this audience right now, to students. Bring your parents, bring everyone who's interested. I think it's going to be a quite cool lecture. I've been there in summer myself. It's a really cool project, and Gabriel is a really nice person who is probably going to give you a really cool presentation. So that's going to be next lecture. What are we going to talk about today? Last week we talked about sufficiency. We first started with what is efficiency, what is consistency, and then slowly but surely made our way to what is sufficiency, instead of trying to get as much as possible, thinking about, okay, what do I actually need? And then we looked at different definitions of eco-sufficiency, like the one from Princeton or the one from the IPCC, which defines eco-sufficiency as a set of policy measures and daily practices that avoid demand for energy, materials, land, water, and other natural resources while providing well-being for all within the planetary boundaries. So very similar or closely related to our sustainability definition that we established at the earlier lectures of this course. So how can I be happy, or how can I be happy or good with having enough, but not this idea of I need more. So this is where sufficiency starts. We looked at examples where how efficiency, consistency, and sufficiency are different or playing together. We had this example of an apartment and insulation, and we also talked a little bit about mobility examples. So from the assumption that you don't need more, but that sufficiency might be enough, we came to the point that Graeber started a little bit in one of his books, where he said, okay, if I need less to have a good life, does it maybe also mean that I need to work less? Because if I need 40, 60, 70, 80 hours per week to make a happy, super consume-driven life, then for a sufficiency-driven life, I might need only half of it. And John Maynard Keynes had a very similar prediction in 1930, where he said, okay, technology is gonna enable us to only work 15 hours a week in the future due to all the technological process, but this did not happen yet. So how did that happen? And then we explored a little bit Graeber's rather, I don't want to say radical, but let's say controversial idea of bullshitterization, bullshit jobs, and ended with his solution to the problem, which was, okay, if we don't if we only have jobs that don't make sense anymore, or if we have a lot of jobs that don't make sense anymore in a system that forces you to work because otherwise you're worthless, what could be a solution to fix this? And he said, okay, let's have a look at the universal basic income, which is a livable benefit paid to all, thus letting people work at their leisure. So essentially, in a sufficiency-driven world, you get paid to have what you need, and if you want more, you need to work for it. And today, we're going to have a look at what a universal basic income is, because most of you probably have never heard of it, or if you have heard of it, you might have heard of a certain type of universal basic income. Depending on what kind of interests you follow, you might have a very critical opinion, or like you have heard very critical opinions on the universal basic income, or essentially people praying that this is the only solution that we can like trust, and so on and so on. So they're very like, it's a very controversial topic. And this lecture today is not going to be all encompassing. This is just like a really quick peek into what universal basic incomes are and what types are there, and like some advantages, disadvantages, and how would you fund this. But you could like do a whole lecture series for a whole semester just on this. And I'm also not an economist, I'm not a sociology person. There are so many like other aspects to this topic that I, as a computer scientist, am not able to fully explain or present to you. So this is supposed to be a peek into a potential, another building block towards circular societies and a more sustainable future. That said, let's get started. So let's start with the basics. What is universal basic income? Short, it's UBI. You might also have heard this term like when someone used the synonyms, like a basic income guarantee, or instead of a universal basic income, there's also sometimes the word unconditional basic income, or in German, it's a bedingungsloses Grundeinkommen. So there are various ways to describe similar concepts here. Currently, no country on this planet has implemented a universal basic income for everyone. There are various pilot projects, and we'll come back to that later. And it's also not really something new, because this idea goes actually back until like for at least 2,000 years or so, where some Roman emperors gave money from their private bank account, in quotation marks, to their population in order to make them more happy, or to favor them more, or to ensure that they are not pissed at you. So this is not really the main motivation behind the universal basic income, but this idea is not like super radical or new, so that it just has emerged in the last few years. The idea of giving someone an unconditional income is actually something that has happened already at least 2,000 years ago, and in between those times 2,000 years ago and now, there have been different occasions and iterations where similar things have been tried, tested, prototyped, or at least like where people have conceptualized this idea and argued that this might not be the worst idea that we as a humanity could have. So, long story short, not implemented yet by any country on a large scale. There are some pilots and a few large-scale experiments, but nothing where you could say, yeah, that definitely works, or no, it does not work for sure. It's still a topic of research and lively debates. Already told you that it's just a teaser, so let's move on. So when you try to get a little bit closer to this idea of a universal basic income, you will find that this is a very multi-dimensional problem. So it's not just 3 dimensions you can see here right now, it's actually even more, but there are at least those 3 dimensions. I will come back to that slide in a second. Let's first have a look at the definitions, and then we're going to get back to the figure, because then I can explain it a little bit better. So as usual, there are multiple definitions. The World Bank defines universal basic income as a transfer that is provided universally, unconditionally, and in cash, while the Basic Income Earth Network has a definition that goes as follows. It is a basic income, a basic income is a periodic cash payment unconditionally delivered to all on an individual basis without means, test, or work requirement. So you will get it no matter whether you are a millionaire, a billionaire, or if you're completely broke or billions in debt. You also will get it no matter whether you are working or not. It doesn't matter if you work, if it doesn't work because you don't want to or because you cannot work. So there are really no strings attached to a universal basic income. That's the main idea. Periodic means you get it at irregular intervals, so maybe once a week, once a month. Cash or any other appropriate medium of exchange. Could also be like digital cash. You don't need coins or gold or whatever. Individual, it is paid to an individual base, so not to households, because households could vary. And it's universal, it's paid to everyone, or I told you, like, it doesn't matter if you're a billionaire or not, you get it. And unconditional, paid without means test and without the requirement to work or to demonstrate the willingness to work. So those are the 5 key properties of a general universal basic income, and then you could go into the more fine granular details for the remaining properties. So let's get back to that one slide with this nice cube. So we have 3 dimensions here. First, who is targeted for universal basic income? Then the second dimension, conditionality, and then third, transfer modalities. So when you're talking about a universal basic income, according to our definition, we're at the very bottom. It is universal, it is unconditional, and it's cash. But depending on the people that are talking about in unconditional about the UBI, you might see a shift of this very straightforward definition along one of those or all 3 of those dimensions. Because some people really like this idea of universal basic income, but they, for example, make it conditional. So you only get it if you work, for example. Like you get this one, but you need to do work. It is not unconditional anymore. Like everyone is like ensured that you survive, but you need to have the willingness to work. So this is maybe, for example, comparable to what we have in Germany as unemployment money. You get it, like I'm simplifying now, because it's very complicated in Germany as always. I'm simplifying now. You get unemployment money if you are willing to work, if you're willing to sign up for a job, and until you get that new job, you're getting paid unemployment money. So there is a conditionality of you get it. It's usually in cash, but could also be otherwise. So this is like the conditionality dimension. You could also go up the targeting dimension. So universal, as I already said, for everyone. Then you could go for categories or on a needs-based. So category could be social pensions. Needs-based could be people who are in need, like not making enough money or somehow suffering from poverty in one or the other way. And if it's unconditional, then you have a guaranteed minimum income that makes sure that you're not starving or not dying, but it doesn't provide you any extra cash or means for leisure or for a life worth living. It's just to make sure that you don't die on the spot. If you go along the conditionality dimension on the needs base, then you could go to conditional cash transfer or for public works or something along those lines. And if we now look at the last dimension that we haven't touched so far, is in what type of means do you get this transfer? It could be cash or any other like suitable means that you can exchange for any goods or services. Or you could go for something like vouchers or in kind. So if you maybe have followed this discussion in the media right now or in the German political dimensions, there you have these discussion for migrants, whether they continue to get cash payments or like something similar, or if they get like a special card that they can take to get services or to pay for something, but they don't get like cash on hand anymore. They cannot use it to withdraw cash, to the best of my knowledge. So there is like a more controlled system. It's not this like what you had in the definition before, where we said it's paid in an appropriate medium of exchange that you can freely trade. If it's like locked up in this card, then you're very limited to what you can do with that cash. So it has a control mechanism. And this is essentially one of the controversial lines of discussion that is somehow related to this topic of universal basic income, because you can look at it from this very human social side where you say, look, we want to give everyone the choice to live a happy life, worthwhile living, according to their own definitions, or like basically we give you something and you can do whatever you like with it, or we use it as some kind of a control mechanism for those people who are unworthy or not willing to work or not likely to do their share of the work. So there's like a very harsh line or dimension of discussion that you can follow here. We'll come to some other controversial parts later. So, but long story short, there is a definition for a universal basic income. There's this general idea. How you implement a basic income is then a little bit up for discussion and can take various forms. Before we now get to a hands-on task, I would like to do a 2-slide detour. So not as long as last week where we did a longer detour for Graeber, but a very short detour on AI in combination with the universal basic income that I discovered earlier today when I was like putting like some fine-tuning for the slides. And I was reading up a little bit more on criticism and downsides and controversial discussions about the universal basic income. And besides some academic literature, I also ended up on this website from Forbes, where they had 5 years ago an article on the universal basic income titled "A Thoroughly Wrong-Headed Idea" by someone called Milton Esrati. And everyone is like free to express their opinion on the universal basic income, and maybe Milton has some good ideas. What I found very confusing and actually outrageous is what I now highlighted here in red, which is a AI proposed tweet that I'm supposed to tweet based on the article's content. So Forbes is telling me, based on that article that I haven't read yet, that I should post this on Twitter, even though I might completely disagree with what they are saying. Like, let's make it independent from the content. You're now presented with a prepared message to post on Twitter despite like not knowing what is actually in there. And for me, it becomes even more distasteful and also not really in line with like university like education, use your own brain to get stuff done. When you look at who Milton Esrati is, because he's not a journalist. He's a finance lobbyist who's like very much involved with a lot of finance companies and actually the communication manager of like one of these, or the economy person of some kind of a financial communication company. So this is essentially paid propaganda that you're supposed to post, which is much better than just a bot posting this stuff online. And you are now essentially the replacement for that bot. The bot is just proposing it to you. So this essentially being a short detour on why you shouldn't trust AI stuff anymore, or not at all, not in the first place. Good. Now, we do a little bit of hands-on. You have got a very, very short and very vague general introduction to universal basic income now. The next 10 minutes, I would like to split you into 2 groups. and not using ChatGPT, because you've just seen what happens if we trust AI too much. They're just going to take over our own opinions, or the way you express your opinions. And just take the time to think about like what advantages you can see with respect to universal basic income, like what problems can it solve besides the one that Graeber teasered, but also what challenges, disadvantages, problems do you see on the horizon that either need to be solved before we implement universal basic income, or that we might have once we have a universal basic income. So welcome to the second part of today's lecture. We just had an offline session on the question of what are the advantages or disadvantages of universal basic income. We did, for everyone who's now watching the video, we did not record that for privacy and discussion reasons, but we had several advantages of universal basic income, like you can be sure that you don't die because you don't have food. You have more freedom in terms of how you would like to spend your life, what jobs to take. But we also talked about some of the, we also might have less like stupid nonsense jobs. But we also talked about like challenges related to the universal basic income, how exactly you're going to structure this, how does it handle inflation, how can you make sure that no one misuses it. But also now, like at the end, then the question: okay, how do you, do people actually want to work? It's like often like one of the main criticisms. If we pay everyone 1,000, 1,200 euros per month, who wants to work? Like, is everyone then just sitting at home watching TV? And if that's not the case, then still the question remains like, who's gonna do the unappealing or very painful, stressful, difficult work tasks that remain. Like food production sector was one example that was listed. The health sector can have like very unappealing aspects to that job. Waste collection is one of these stereotypical examples. Construction work is often very painful and neck-breaking. So there are a lot of jobs where like, okay, this is really harsh, and would you do it if you don't have to anymore? And that is obviously something that we cannot solve just in this 5-minute discussion, which has like a lot of quite difficult implications. But you could maybe ask yourself that question, and also like maybe raise it as a question when like for dinner, or when you talk to your parents or some of your friends. If all your needs, your basic needs, are covered, would you then drop out of your study program and never ever consider to work on anything again in the future? Or will it just make your life different with respect to the choices you make for your job? Would you still look for a high-paying computer science job? Or would you go into the social sector and try to do something good? Would you do something that would usually be unpaid, not paid at all? Would that really make a difference for you? Or would you maybe just continue your job and work the same amount, or just work less? Because this question is then also heavily connected to how to fund a universal basic income, which we're going to cover in a second, which is like often in a combination where you get universal basic income, but obviously can still work. And a lot of people still need to work so that we can afford a universal basic income. And everything you earn on top is yours, so you can still use it for whatever purpose you like. And would you just like really drop out and not work at all anymore, or would you continue working, maybe in a reduced manner or in the same time? And for me personally, I would be happy to get 1,000 euro extra per month. Like, I would not complain about that. Professors have a nice income, even though I'm just a junior professor, but I cannot complain. I have a very comfortable salary, maybe a little bit too much, but I would not mind another 1K extra in my bank account per month. But I'd probably still do my job. Actually, I would just continue doing my job the same way I would do before. And when I talk to like some people I know, there had like generally been this consensus that they would do something very similar. like no one would drop out completely. Most of them would maybe reduce their hours. Others would just continue working as they do. Of course, I have a very biased bubble of people that I talk to on a regular basis and that I discuss those kinds of topics with. So they're definitely not a representative study. But ask yourself that question, maybe also talk to your people. Like, is this really something that would lead you to drop out, or would you just continue in a very similar manner? And that then leading to the question whether we really have a shortage of people doing difficult, challenging jobs. And if that is the case, wouldn't those jobs suddenly become more relevant to society and therefore more well paid, making them more attractive? So some kind of a supply-demand problem, challenge, mechanism that might solve that problem. Because if no one needs to do shitty jobs anymore, then the supply should go to zero or like just above zero. Therefore, the demand should go up, and therefore, according to capitalism, the salary for those jobs should go through the roof, suddenly making it more interesting. And then maybe some people are like, yeah, sure, okay, now I'm gonna do this part-time because suddenly it's super well paid and I can afford a lot of luxurious stuff doing that. But this is definitely like a more complex discussion, but a very necessary discussion as part of this universal basic income idea. Also happy to continue that discussion and these thoughts, obviously, in the Q&A session, because this is something super controversial. So I'm very much looking forward to some discussions here. So those were the placeholder results for the advantages and challenges. Now, taking a few minutes to talk about one of the main challenges that come to your mind when you just think about a universal basic income. Because obviously it's quite nice to just get 1,000, 1,200 euros per month for free, but then the question arises, how do we pay those money? And we can make a very simple extrapolation and a calculation. We roughly have 84 million people in Germany. Everyone gets, like usually you have in Germany, when they talk about a UBI, ranges between 1,000 and 1,200 euros, something along those lines. Let's stick with 1,200 euros. If you multiply those two numbers, you add up with something around the 1 trillion euros, or in German, 1 billion euros. So 1,000 billions, or in German, 1,000 Milliarden euros. So quite a lot of money. To put that in perspective, how much, like what's the annual budget that Germany has right now based on taxes? It is roughly, as you can see on the right upper corner, roughly 460 billions per year. So we're $500 million short on what we need. $500 billion, sorry. And roughly 1/3, a little bit more than 1/3 of this goes to, which is the red part, goes to social, so work and social related benefits. So you have a huge portion of money that you could just like then scrap, because when you have a UBI, you lose the need for a lot of those services that are now provided by the government or subsidized by the government. Like you don't need unemployment money anymore. You don't need money, extra money if you cannot afford a house, or like housing in general if you do not have enough money for food. Also money for children, like the Kindergeld in Germany. All of this, like the government would save all that money. But even then, you're still $500 billion short. So just taking the system as it is right now and switching to UBI won't work, because even if we take the whole government household, funding household, like the funding budget, it still wouldn't work. So we need to think about something else. And one very prominent solution to that problem became even more prominent after the financial crisis of 2008, where we had quite some challenging times with an imploding financial system, a lot of gambling happening, which then led to an implosion of the financial system, making usually the not rich people suffer and the rich people getting more rich. And in this part of this, like when the dust settled, some people proposed as part of a solution, obviously not as a solution to the financial crisis back then, but as part of a solution, is the so-called financial transaction tax, which you then could use to also fund something like a universal basic income. So the financial transaction tax is essentially something that for each and every financial transaction in the finance sector, you have to pay a very small fee. So you don't have to pay it when you transfer money as part of your payment process in the supermarket, or when you get a coffee, or when you pay your student bills, or your housing, water bills and stuff. You only do it when you buy stocks, when you buy something within the financial sector. So they're very much targeting high-speed trading here, or other finance gambling activities, which make, you might not think about this too much as students, but this makes it up a large portion of the economic system. And the idea being that it could prevent financial market speculations, because if you have to pay for each and every of those transactions a small fee, that already cuts into your profit. And you would rather be incentivized to invest in the real economy. And in addition, you might make some extra money for something like universal basic income. How much of universal basic income and for which country you could fund through such a tax highly depends on the country. And even within specific countries, the ranges or the estimations of how much you could make from that are very far into both extremes. So that's why I do not give you any specific numbers here, not even for Germany, because what I found was very fast, it was spread out very much. It didn't really make sense to present those numbers. So for some countries that have a very strong finance system with a lot of financial activities in that market, you can make more money, even though some of these activities might vanish once you have such a transaction tax. Other countries that traditionally don't have a very strong financial sector obviously won't make a lot of money. So it's not really a solution that works for every country unless you come up with some kind of a world government that then imposes this tax everywhere and then pools the money. But we won't have that in the near future, so we don't even have to think about that option. So what could be alternative suggestions here? Oh, there's a typo. Not less gambling, but gambling. Maybe Anand could make a short note so that I can fix that later. Good, what could be alternative ways? So mostly we're talking about various taxing approaches so that you try to reformulate, reinvent, or somehow adapt the current tax system in such a way that you could collect taxes to fund the system. So just making taxes based on work provided, as we do right now, doesn't really work well, and you wouldn't get enough of this, so you have to find different ways. Scrapping the old system, finding something new. And one of the approaches that have been explored is a so-called negative income tax, where individuals earning below a certain threshold receive supplemental pay from the government, e.g. universal basic income. And once you go above that, above a certain threshold, you start also paying taxes on top of that universal basic income. So I did not manage to translate that figure into English yet, but essentially what you can see on the lower left part is where you have zero income. And essentially everything that is green is where you get a universal basic income without paying anything else. Once you pass a certain point, which would be the 1,200 euros, you suddenly start paying taxes on top of everything else that you make as money. So that could be some kind of a model for negative income tax. So if you don't work, you get money back from the government. If you start working up to a certain point, you pay on top. That's how you have a negative income tax. What else could be done? You could think about taxation of consumption, something like a UBI that is financed by a value-added tax, so Umsatzsteuer in German, which replaces all other taxes and social security contributions that we have right now. So you would essentially take a more drastic approach of a system that we already have. You scrap everything else, like no other taxes, but you ask for a quite high value-added tax, a very high Umsatzsteuer. So for everything that you consume, you have to pay quite a lot of money, but you don't have to pay for anything else. Like you don't have to pay for for your work income. It doesn't matter how much you make, you pay zero income tax, but the more you consume, the more you pay, which then also would be a nice way to especially tax luxurious stuff very nicely. So for everyone to cover the basic needs, like you more or less have the same amount of taxes that everyone needs to pay, but if you have a lot of extra money and continue consuming, you pay more and more taxes. Or you could even think about something like having super high extra value added taxes for very luxurious and environmentally unfriendly products. There's like a lot of room to jiggle there for all of those different taxation approaches. Like what I'm describing to you now is just like the really broad, rough, general idea. For each of those categories, there are different sub-flavors and approaches on how you can do it. It's just to give you a little bit of an idea, okay, how could this work without having been proven yet, because we haven't tested it yet. So negative income tax one, taxation of consumption via value-added tax being another. There are also ideas to think about approach with taxation of natural resources. So for everything we do, we need natural resources. Everything that consumes natural resources, you tax that. Similar to this taxation of consumption approach. And there are many, many more, but I feel like an economist would be way better suited to explain all of those in detail. And for the next iteration of this course, we'll actually try to get someone who's more of an expert in this in detail. And then we'll, of course, update the course and you can have a more detailed view on this. For today, like giving you an idea what universal basic income is and getting the rough direction straight. Good. Now you might be interested in pilot projects for UBIs, like who tried it yet? How can I maybe participate? Because especially as a student, it might sound quite nice to get 1,200 euros per month for free, because that might help some of you to just focus on your study program or to skip your student job to focus on your study, or as someone already pointed out when we asked for advantages of UBI, that you could maybe take some time to think about some entrepreneurial activities, which you right now might not be able to follow because you need to fill your fridge and you need to study and pass your exam, and then 24 hours are gone. So how could you maybe get there? Because there are regular studies, scientific studies in various countries for decades now on and off again and again. But there's also an approach or system that you can sign up right now. The German website Mein Grundeinkommen is doing a raffle, I think like once a month or so. They're handing out free universal incomes, free universal basic incomes. I think they're handing, if I'm not mistaken, they're handing out 2 different types of universal basic income. You have to check which one they're handing out right now. There was like different approaches, but essentially for 1 to 3 years, you can get some universal basic income, and they've already handed out 1,671 until yesterday. So they're doing this quite successful, and you can sign up. You can also read up on their resources pertaining to that topic, and they're also reporting in a scientific manner, like what people, like how did the universal basic income impact the people who received it? Like, did they just put it in the bank account? Did they go on a trip around the world? Did they put it in the stock market? Did they change jobs? What did they do with that money? So it's not just from a like from a perspective of, yeah, let's try something, but it's also about like gathering further information here. Good, so pilot being done right now, have fun if you like to. And that already brings us to the end of this session. I promise you it's gonna be a rather short one because we skipped some of the parts and leave them for the next semester. What's the main takeaway today? We talked about this universal basic income as a potential building block for circular societies and a solution that Graeber proposed to the problem of bullshitterization and bullshit jobs, or unnecessary jobs created by capitalism as an inefficiency. In a universal basic income, everyone receives a minimum income in the form of an unconditional transfer payment. There are different types of UBI, and that might make them more tempting or less tempting depending on what type of universal basic income you might have. Right now, there's no country on this planet that has implemented it yet, despite some pilots. And we also briefly touched like the different advantages and challenges of a universal basic income, and we looked a little bit into how could you potentially fund such universal basic income, with still a lot of question marks left open or left on the table and up for discussion. But unfortunately, I cannot give you like any conclusive answers yet because we're not there yet. And that's it for today. As usual, some additional resources that you can check out, some being scientific, others being more from the popular direction. And that's pretty much it.